So what's trending right now and what is causing panic, mass hysteria, a frenzy right now in America, especially from Maine to Texas, on the East Coast here, it is actually the port workers' strike. It was predicted to take place today, October 1st, and it is now official. The port workers are now on strike. And today I have a special guest, Marie Diaz from Eyes on the Times, who will be breaking this news to us and giving us the pertinent application of what these things mean for us as Bible-believing students and for the world at large. It's time for all of us to get ready. So welcome, Marie, to Midday Power Surge.
Thank you so much, Pastor, for having me.
Yes, we want to just eliminate all the introduction, the pleasantries, and get right into the crux of the matter, because what we're seeing has been predicted. It's all predictive programming. We have seen the tyrants actually speaking about the coming synchronized chaos. And I must confess, while driving yesterday, my wife said to me, from synchronized chaos to organized chaos. Exactly what it is. They're the ones who are actually bringing out these crises, which we know fulfill the Hegelian dialectic. And I know you are going to share with us how the Pope of Rome actually met and blessed the union leaders ahead of this port worker strike. Unbelievable. I'm not surprised. And those of us who understand end-time prophecy and the role of the papacy are not surprised at all. But for us and for the world, talk to us. What's breaking?
Sure. So, Pastor, but let's go ahead and lay a foundation before we dive into the connection with the Pope. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this article from Fortune magazine. And the reason why we're looking at this is because the World Economic Forum is telling us essentially the era that we're about to enter into. It says we're in a new polycrisis era. And when we look at the biblical implications, right, the Bible tells us in Matthew chapter 24, verse 7, it doesn't say it in so many words, but it talks about a polycrisis, right? Wars and famines and pestilences and earthquakes. And so the World Economic Forum is saying this is what we should expect as the new norm. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up is because you're going to hear similar rhetoric throughout this entire presentation. And what I want your audience to understand is that the time is now, and it's time for us to prepare. And Sister White also tells us that the final movements will be rapid ones. So let's take a look at this next article here. This article is actually coming from Zero Hedge, and it says, an era of shock events. And he's
prepare for, yes, Marie.
Yes, sir.
Yes, headline.
Yes.
Oh, yes. To there for a few moments.
Sure. Yes. Prepare for an era of shock events, right, from the World Economic Forum. And so I'm just going to take a look here at some of the wording here in this paragraph. It says, perhaps the most ominous piece in this article in Schwab's promise that the world is on the cusp of an era of shock events, right? It says, look for global risks to further be exacerbated by unexpected destabilizing shock events. Now that's interesting, right? Because they're telling you that these shock events are designed or meant to destabilize society. And so we have to keep that in the forefront of our mind as we're moving forward. And the interesting thing also is that they're not only telling us that these events are coming, but they also have a solution that's already prepared. And so this is what we're going to take a look at. We're going to listen to this next video clip here.
The United Nations is in a unique position to act as a platform and a convening space for key stakeholders. As global shocks become more complex and disruptive, we need emergency platforms that swing into action automatically, convening major players according to agreed protocols. We cannot walk into the next global pandemic or shock without being better prepared. In short, we need greater global solidarity today and with future generations, better management of critical issues of global concern, and an upgraded United Nations that can meet the challenges of a new era.
That's clear.
Right. And, Pastor, this is, on the heels of the event that just took place in New York, right, with the Summit of the Future, where all of these world leaders came together and they essentially signed this pact for the future, which we literally just discussed this past week, where they're laying the groundwork for a one world government. And so they're saying, in view of these global shocks, that we need to come together and create this one world government so that we can combat these issues. And so these global shock events, whatever you want to call it, black swan events, these things that are happening, it's just the next cog on the wheel. It's just what needs to take place in order for them to kind of roll out the next part of their agenda. And so what I want us to do next is to take a look at this chart here, which comes from the World Economic Forum. And they list several events, several items as to what we should expect when we're looking at these global shocks, right? And so I just want to name a few things here, and you can obviously take a look at it for yourself. They discuss major climactic events. We could discuss what happened with this recent hurricane, right? They also, and this is what I want your audience to particularly hone in on, is a disruption in flow of goods and services. Isn't that what we're experiencing now? Yes. Pastor, we were just talking, the gentleman earlier, we were just talking about what just took place here in Georgia, right? And how, that could be another global shock that, we're experiencing. I don't know for sure, but 3 out of the 7 events that just were announced during the United Nations, we're seeing taking place right here in the United States.
Yes.
Right. And so as we're continuing here, we're going to take another look at what the World Economic Forum and the UN and everyone is saying needs to happen once we start experiencing these global shocks. So let's take a look at this video here.
Let me read out what the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, his policy brief 2, issued on March of 2023. I propose that the General Assembly provide the Secretary General and the United Nations system with a standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an emergency platform in the event of a future complex global shock of sufficient scale. Guess who determines that? The World Health Organization. It reveals in their definition a possible global shock, including large-scale climate or environmental events, determined by who? The Secretary General. Future pandemics. We all endured what the problem we had with the latest virus. High-impact events, involving a biological agent, determined by who? The World Health Organization. Disruption of global flows of goods, determined by who? Not America, but the WHO under the Secretary General.
Yeah. And as my colleague, Mr. Good, pointed out, they can define an emergency in any way they want. And believe me, it will be creative, and it won't be a healthcare crisis again next time. It'll be something related to the climate or gun control or some other woke agenda that they have on their radar.
It's clear.
Scary stuff here, right? And so what I want your audience to realize is that and this is just my personal assumption, I believe that these global shocks have begun and they're rolling out their plan. But here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to transition here. We're actually going to discuss what is currently taking place. And obviously, this is, the strikes that are happening all across the East Coast. And so we have this next video clip here we're going to take a look at.
Breaking news overnight. Tens of thousands of dock workers walking off the job just after midnight. The strike threatens the nation's supply chain and could lead to higher prices and possible shortages. Ports from Maine to Texas, like the ones you're seeing live right now, are being impacted. Elizabeth Schulze starts us off at the vital port of New York and New Jersey. Good morning to you, Elizabeth.
Good morning, Michael. Hundreds of union workers here tell us that they are demanding a fair contract, and the union's president says that they will stay on strike until they get that. Until then, busy shipping hubs like the Port of New York and New Jersey here, the busiest on the East Coast, are at a virtual standstill.
Nothing's going to move without us.
This morning, tens of thousands of union dock workers at more than a dozen ports from Maine to Texas are off the job and on the picket line.
We're here to support for going forward the future. No automation, We want to secure our jobs.
At midnight, the International Longshoremen's Association announcing its first strike in nearly 50 years after it failed to reach a new contract agreement with the U.S. Maritime Alliance. During 11th hour negotiations, the union insisting on a 77% pay increase over 6 years and limits on the use of automated machines. The shipping industry group responding with the nearly 50% pay hike.
I want to tell you all what you're doing is right. This is going down in history. What we're doing here.
14 vital ports that absorb more than half of the cargo shipped to the U.S. from other countries are now at a standstill. Fresh fruit, clothes, machinery, and medicine won't be loaded on or off container ships, potentially costing the American economy up to $7.5 billion in 1 week. Analysts say for every day the strike lasts, it could take 6 days to clear the backlog, an echo of supply chain bottlenecks during the pandemic. Retailers like executive Kevin Rhee say a strike lasting more than a couple weeks could force businesses like his to raise prices for customers.
If all the East Coast and the Gulf Coast ports are closed, businesses will be bringing things in from the West Coast, which will cause more congestion there, and you have to transport that all the way across the country. Ultimately, what that means is higher costs for consumers.
The union says it will still handle military cargo and cruise ships will run on schedule during the strike. The White House has just released a statement saying that President Biden and Vice President Harris are closely monitoring any supply chain impacts. Robin.
All right, Elizabeth, thank you.
Of course, just monitoring. Marie.
Right. And, obviously we know what the immediate implications are going to be. When we look at this next article here, it's going to spark fears of, we're already dealing with inflation. And of course, there's going to be more shortages. There's this other article here, that's coming from Fox News where it says U.S. shoppers start to stock up essentials as port strikes pressure prices to go even higher, and so of course there's going to be shortages. People already can't afford food. They can't afford the things that they need. And so this is just going to continue to exacerbate an already existing issue, and I just want to mention the climate here in the United States, not just about the political climate, but just the climate altogether. It's like dry tinder, and it just needs one spark and, something is going to happen. And, we've already discussed the fact that a lot of people believe that we're, on the cusp of another civil war or revolution. I don't know. And of course, the spirit of prophecy tells us, that spirit, is going to envelop the entire world. And so we're seeing the conditions for this type of thing. We're just going to look at one more video. This video is coming from Governor Hochul from New York. And I just want you to pay particular attention to what she is actually concerned about moving forward.
Chris, clearly, whatever is perishable is going to be felt first.
Sure.
And that's what we keep hearing, that food is going to go bad. We'll see if this is still on in a week. But as the longer it takes to resolve this, you're going to see shortages of everything.
Mm-hmm. Right. We've discussed that, obviously, that there's going to be shortages. But there's another video where
the potential for disruption is significant.
Potential for disruption is significant. Interesting. Here she is, Governor of New York.
The potential for disruption is significant. We've not had an event occur like this in our ports since 1977, and that lasted 12 days. We're deeply concerned about the impact that a strike could have on our supply chains, especially when it comes to critical goods like medical supplies and others.
That's interesting, right? Medical supplies. And so, this is why it's so important for us to learn the health message and to be prepared for whatever crisis, we're faced with. And thank God that he's given us wisdom through the spirit of prophecy to be able to see these things and to prepare for them. But what I want your audience also to realize is that before the port crisis took place, yes, sir.
I want to chime in right here because I know what the cynics and the mockers, the scoffers are going to say. We have gone through something similar before, as just mentioned in 1977, and we came out of it. So what's the big deal about this one in 2024? How would you respond to that?
Well, the papacy's fingerprints are all over it. And we're going to allude to that as we near the end of this presentation. And I think that's what the difference is. And of course, we're looking at the context in which this is also happening. Yes, maybe there was a strike back then, but I don't think there was a hurricane happening. I don't think there was a pact of the future that was signed at that particular time. There's tons of things that are happening. And, the Bible likens it to birth pangs, right? And they're increasing with intensity and rapidity. And so we're comparing apples to oranges. Yes, that event may have taken place, but there's so many other events that have taken place in addition to that. And this is why we should be concerned.
Continue.
Yes. So I just want to mention also that before the the strike took place, this at midnight, the food chain was already facing some issues. We're going to take a look at this new article from Reuters, right? It says U.S.-Mexico rail delays hit farm sector ahead of possible port strikes. And so even before this is, like I said, the port strikes, it's just going to exacerbate an already existing issue. I'm just going to read a few lines here. It says, rail backlogs are disrupting export trades between the United States and Mexico and snarling agricultural supply chains as the fall harvest is underway. And so now they're harvesting, right? And they're already running into some issues. Here's another point here. It says a potential East and Gulf Coast port strike that could begin on Tuesday would exacerbate the problem. And so, and of course, Pastor, we've discussed Mariana Mazzucato in one of her reports. She actually talked about how there was going to be a famine. There was going to be these issues. The Bible tells us that these issues were going to take place. And so now the movement is on foot. And the question is, are we ready for it?
And for those who want to go back and take a look at that video, it's when we covered the Pope's mistress. The Pope's mistress. Continue, please.
Yes, correct. And so now I just want the strike just took place this morning, right? But I want you to see in this next video how they're already experiencing clashes. People are already being violent. Like, it's unbelievable. It just started. And no one is actually feeling the effects as of yet. It usually takes a little bit before you start feeling it. About a month or two is when you're going to start feeling the effects. But let's just take a look at this next video.
In circles now, Baltimore police were here earlier reminding the picketers that they cannot block the entrance to the port. The longshoremen walked off the job at 12:01 a.m. There was confusion and anger as picketers initially tried to stop trucks from entering, and it did turn violent.
I come here for 7 years. I pull the trash and the debris out of here for the Port of Baltimore, and the officer told me to come back and go in there to get out of my way, and they attacked me and broke the windshield and serrated my face. Look at it.
Now, we don't know exactly what happened. The union members said the truck hit one of the picketers as they swarmed around it. We did see an ambulance come to assist, and we know that that gentleman did speak with police officers. Again, we'll let the authorities sort out exactly what happened there. Now, 45.
So do you see the environment, the feelings, the tension, that's accumulating as we're going into this crisis? And so not only that per se, but also when you're starting to look at how and the way that the unions are demanding, and, we're just going to take a look at this article here. Now it says, yes, sir. It says the East Coast Port. It says the ILA union rejects wage hike offer near 50% as shutdown nears at midnight, right? And so I don't know about you. Of course, I'm not a union worker. I don't know what these individuals are dealing with, but a 50% increase seems like a lot to me, right? But let's just take a look at this video here, and you're going to see the demands that they're asking for. And I want you to ask yourself whether this is reasonable. Let's just take a listen 50%. To this.
No, hold 1 second there. In the previous video clip, we just saw how the picketers from the union were blocking truckers from coming in to do their own duties. In other words, if you don't sympathize with us, we will lay hands on you. That happened in Russia. In the Russian Revolution. It happened before in France. If you don't sympathize with the revolutionists, with those who are rioting, those who are actually calling for change, you are going to be marked men. Inspiration says it's going to be repeated in the last days for God's commandment-keeping people, and that reference is Selected Messages, Book 2, page 142 on into page 143. If we do not, and the context is with the unions, the labor unions, the trade unions. If God's people don't sympathize with them, we, commandment-keeping people, are going to be marked men. They will attempt to lay hands on us. Let's get back here. The ILA union rejects wage hike over near 50%. 50% they're asking for as the shutdown nears. Here's a clip.
Eric, as of midnight, hundreds of Port Miami workers right here behind me are not showing up to their jobs. They're actually staying here for as long as it takes. They're coming and going in shifts. Right now, as you can see behind me, this group of people is demanding two things for their new contract: better wages and a total ban on automation in an effort to stay safe on the job. These are some of the workers who handle all of the goods that come to the port on a daily basis, including Saturdays and Sundays. These union members say they want a 77% wage increase over 6 years and a total ban on the automation of cranes, gates, container moving trucks, and other type of automation equipment. On the other hand, the United States Maritime Alliance represents the ports. The group offered dock workers nearly a 50% pay increase, pledging to keep limits on automation. We know that a lot
I don't know, Pastor, but maybe it's just me, but I feel like that's a little bit unreasonable. 77% pay increase. In addition to that, I mean, we're moving forward, and the fact that the unions just don't want any automation, they don't want any technology. And of course, there's always that fear that technology is going to take their place, but they're saying that within the contract that they're willing to minimize the amount of automation that they're going to use. And they're saying, if you listen to them, they're saying they are not going to budge. And so I just want the audience to keep that in mind as we're moving forward.
So that
and
means
you ask why.
If I'm making $1, I need $1.75. If I'm making $100, $175. If I make $1,000, $1,750. Just keep on going. If I make $10,000, and if they do not budge, if they don't yield, and this stalemate continues, we can see the what is going to be ominous. There's going to be a crisis, and it's going to continue and get worse. It's going to get in a form of burgeoning. It's going to be very disruptive, and people are going to suffer. And let me tell you something: the powers that be, which we'll cover, they want it so because they have an end goal.
Absolutely. And, Pastor, they're holding the economy hostage, right? And so, like you rightly said, you would think that those that are in charge would see what we see and want to mitigate the situation, but not so. We're actually going to take a look at that right now. We're going to see what the response has been from the current administration. So we're going to take a look at this article from Reuters. And I just want to read a few lines from here. It says, Biden won't block potential strike at East Coast ports. Now, of course, you can just look at this as an isolated incident, but I want you to look at the inconsistencies in this administration. Listen here. It says, U.S. President Joe Biden does not intend to invoke a federal law to prevent port strikes. It says, we've never invoked the Taft-Hartley to break a strike, and we are not considering it now. And for those of you that aren't aware of it, the Taft-Hartley Act is the federal law that was put into place in 1947, and it kind of puts limits on the union. But let's just take a look at this other article here, and I'm going to show you the inconsistencies. It says, and this is coming from Reuters as well, it says, what we know about the U.S. East Coast port dispute. And it says the White House said that it is not trying to help broker a deal, listen, as it did last year during the West Coast talks. That's interesting, right?
Yes.
So, for those of you that recall, last year we actually were on the border of going into another strike on the West Coast. However, the administration decided that they wanted to intervene. So the question is, why are they not intervening now? And of course, I personally believe that it's deliberate, that they want this crisis to come. And we're going into an election year. Again, there's just so many things that are happening. But we're going to take a look at another clip, and we're
hold it right there. So if one of their purposes and reasons for not trying to end and to intervene, to stop and halt this strike because of the election that's coming up, and they'll do anything to win an election, we are now at October 1st. That means we have approximately 35 to 36 days to go, November 5th. So are you telling me that they are willing for the whole nation to suffer supply chain crisis for the next 35 days in order to win an election? If that's the case, they don't care about us. Carry on.
Absolutely. Now, Pastor, you just said something and it brought something to mind. Do you remember when we saw the movie, the previews for the movie, the one about the cyber attack?
Oh, Leave the World Behind?
Yes. Do you remember how they said in the beginning a third term, and they also talked about the potential for martial law. So just get this picture here. If people can't afford food, these people that are dealing with the consequences of the recent hurricane, can you imagine, what could potentially happen? And like I said, people are already angry with the political environment, everything. Like I said, it's dry tinder. They just need a spark. And I feel like they're trying to push us there. And who knows, maybe this is going to be the issue that will push us into that. But we're just going to take a listen to this video from an official from the Biden administration. And we're going to see how they are totally hands off. Like she is like nonchalant, and she talks about the fact that this is going to affect the economy, that this is going to cause a crisis, but they're just hands off, like they could care less. But let's take a listen here.
So one quick clarification before we go any further. It's in both movies, Leave the World Behind and The Civil War. Third-term president, the Civil War, as the person was driving and went off the road. And on the radio, it said a third-term president, martial law, creating the crisis. Enough said. Here's a video clip.
What would this mean for businesses?
And this is the Biden-Harris Commerce Secretary says she's staying out of potential port worker strike. Interesting. Take a listen.
What would this mean for businesses if we go into the strike, and what do you know about it?
It's not a secret that this would be, depending on how long it lasts, could be incredibly disruptive to commerce. Again, I have not been very focused on that. I would refer you to the White House or the Transportation Secretary. As I said, I haven't been particularly involved.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. She's talking about how it would be incredibly disruptive, right? But like I said, they're completely hands off. They don't care, and so this is why, again, when the world is facing a crisis, you have to make sure that you're prepared. We can't wait for the government to take care of us, and we have to be independent. So now, Pastor, we're going to transition, and this is really the crux of the presentation and why it's so significant, the biblical applications here. It's because, whoever coined the phrase, all roads lead to Rome, they obviously knew what they were talking about. And so when I first saw this, I just couldn't believe it. I believe it, but I just couldn't believe it that the Pope actually met with the leaders or some of the members from the ILA, this particular union, 9 months before this crisis began. And so we're just going to take a look at a couple of articles. The first article It says Pope Francis, and listen, he invites International President Harold Daggett to send ILA delegations to Rome in early January, and listen, to receive papal blessings for the ILA members and their families. That's just something, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. But we're going to take a look at a couple of pictures here. And I do want to read a couple of lines from these pictures that were posted on Facebook. Here, it says Pope Francis gives dock workers around the world papal blessing at the Vatican. And again, this happened in January. And it says delegates from the ILA and the IDC were honored to meet Pope Francis at the Vatican yesterday. It says Pope Francis graciously spent time with the delegations, accepting gifts and blessing a statue of who they say is Mary for the IDC to share with the dock workers unions facing challenges, and so again, of course, for those of us who know the biblical implications, Sister White told us that these things were going to happen. And so we shouldn't be surprised when we see the Pope's fingerprints. Of course, there are other pictures here from Facebook, but I want to get to this one article here, and I want you to hear the response from the leader of the ILA. It says here, I am deeply honored that who they call, we'll just say Pope Francis, has honored me and the ILA with the invitation to meet with him and receive blessings for the ILA members and their families. This again comes from the president, right? He says Pope Francis has indicated that his blessings will extend to those waterfront shore, unions like ours, that we may negotiate a great contract for our members. Now, I want you to pause for a minute.
Yes.
You may forget that this happened 9 months before the strike. So if you didn't know any better, right, you would think that all of this is coincidental. But, Pastor, I have such a vivid imagination. It's almost like I feel like these union leaders went there and they got knighted by the Pope and received the blessing. And now they're going forth to do what he asked them to do. And so I don't know, Pastor, this is incredible. I don't know if you have anything to say here.
Just reread that for those who are in the back of the class and those who were just, looking elsewhere and distracted. Pope Francis has indicated that his blessings will extend to those waterfront longshore unions like ours, that we may, catch it now, negotiate a great contract for our members. What is the issue over right now? Contract negotiation. They create the crisis, and I believe the Pope doesn't care. The Jesuit leader, the papacy, the tyrants of darkness, some men we don't even see, right? They don't care about any contracts with union workers. Their objective is to divide and conquer, and so that the papacy can regain her world dominance. And any means necessary, they would do it. So create a stalemate in America, destroy the economy, create riots, and we can now implement this so-called solution, which in eventuality was the end goal before the whole thing began. That's the objective. They play both sides, Marie.
Right. And I feel like perhaps this is why their demands are so ridiculous, because they want to strike. They wanted the workers to strike, and they know that the request was unreasonable and that those that own the ports, they weren't going to, concede to their demands. And so I hope that we're able to see, where all of this is tending. But it goes on to say, so Pope Francis has great love and respect for workers around the world, and he's especially fond of this longshore workers. Of all the workers, you're particularly fond of this particular union, which just so happens, to cover 36 ports along the United States East Coast. Like, this is unbelievable. I hope we're able to see and connect the dots. Yes, sir.
And not only 36 ports, it covers North America, it covers Canada, it covers the Bahamas, and where else? And several other countries. The ILA. And leading up to 1888, remember, the Pope was also in bed, the papacy was in bed with the unions, the labor unions, the workers' unions, to get a Sunday law enforced. History, my friends, is being repeated. The prophecies are being fulfilled.
Right. And so are we ready, right? And I was speaking to one of my sisters in Christ, and she was just saying, when the leader of the ILL was speaking, when you showed the video yesterday, there was like arrogance, and we're going to play the video again, but I just want you to see how he's speaking. And the reason why I believe he's able to speak the way that he is speaking, because he knows that he has the backing that he needs to be able to do what he wants to do. So let's just take a look at this next video clip here.
I'm going to roll 2 clips quickly.
Well, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to save everybody's job when it comes to the ILA and to all the unions around the world, because we're going to fight it with that alliance. I'll shut them down throughout the world to prove that we can beat them.
Here it is, clip 2.
These people today don't know what a strike is.
Right.
When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down.
Last one.
30 moves an hour, maybe to 8. They're going to be like this. Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody does.
Marie.
Lord have mercy. Pastor, what more can we say?
I want to say something.
The crisis is here. Are we ready?
If you notice, the Pope is also pushing for AI technology and automation. And then he says it may be time to now roll out the universal basic income. So on one hand, he's promoting some policies that the ILA is against. They said, listen, give us what? 75% raise? And then we don't want any automation in our industry. But the Pope is playing both sides, Marie.
Right. And so, it just goes to show that they want this crisis. And, like I said, it'd be one thing if we were just looking at this event from a purely, secular perspective, but we have the Bible and the spirit of prophecy that already tells us that these things are going to lead to the final crisis. It goes back to what I originally said when I referenced Matthew chapter 24, verse 7. Verse 8 says, all of these are the beginnings of sorrow. And so when you're seeing these crises, when you're seeing how the leaders are hands off, when you see how they could do something, but they chose not to, when you're seeing these leaders speak in the fashion and the way that they are, and the fact that the Pope's fingerprints are all over this should be a sign for us to flee the cities. This should be a sign for us to gird up the loins of our minds to be prepared, because we are here. We're here, Pastor.
All right. Stay right there. I want to bring something in here just to confirm. Let me get that paragraph, preacher, on the left there. Yes. So they cover North America, the ILA. They cover Puerto Rico. That was it. Canada and the Bahamas. That's how huge and influential the ILA is. So he knows what he's talking about. I will cripple you, he says. And inspiration told us this would take place in the book Education, page 228, which I covered on yesterday. That's not where I'm going today. Take a look at this. Now, as I was speaking yesterday, Marie, and I covered the movie called Leave the World Behind, and we know who was behind the actual production of that movie, and they spoke about the 3 stages to topple a country's government from within. Do you know that yesterday I said we're now under the 2nd stage? And while I was speaking, the 1st stage raised its ugly head again. The 1st stage is isolation. And then it begins to expound on isolation. Disable their communication and transportation. And in the movie, the people lost internet connection. Their cell phones could not work. And what happened on yesterday?
Verizon.
One more time, Marie. What happened on yesterday?
Verizon. There was an outage. Mm-hmm.
Yes,
there was. Right. And it wasn't just Verizon. There was, some issues with AT&T and T-Mobile. So it's interesting, predictive programming.
That's the 1st stage. So now the only question is, how long are we going to remain in the 1st and 2nd stages? Because we're in the 1st stage and the crises are mounting. We're already in the 2nd stage. Synchronized chaos. That's number 2. I believe that. Second stage, synchronized chaos. Terrorize them, which I call now, since Hillary gave me this term, organized chaos. Exactly where we are. With that in mind, yesterday I spoke about what's happening here in Georgia, Conyers, Georgia, with the biochemical lab fire explosion and what is happening in the atmosphere, and how people were told to start boiling their water, washing their hands, etc. Now, they had what was called a mandatory evacuation of all residents in Conyers and surrounding cities. And now some folks went back home, and now they're telling them they must have a stay in place, shelter in place order was reinstated just before the election. Take a look.
Staying in Rockdale County, breaking right now at 8. We're getting our first aerial view of that chemical fire in Rockdale. This is a look from about an hour ago at that huge plume that's over the biolab in Conyers. This morning, Rockdale County officials issuing a new shelter-in-place warning. This comes after the countywide order was lifted last night, 36 hours after a chemical fire in Conyers.
So that chemical reaction could be seen for miles, as some of it is still actually in the air today. That's a concern. Atlanta News First Sarah Hammond tells us what the new alert says.
County officials sent out a new alert this morning saying this chemical cloud is still blowing over the county. They say if you see it blowing over where you are, if you see haze around you, smell chlorine, they are asking you to shelter in place until it moves away from where you are. So they're just asking you to keep an eye on the sky today. This new alert comes just hours after the Environmental Protection Agency said the air and water in the area are safe despite detecting chlorine in the air. Authorities say the sprinkler system inside BioLab sprayed water on a chemical inside of the facility Sunday morning and created a chemical reaction, causing that huge plume to billow in the air. People in other parts of metro Atlanta began to see and smell the effects of the chemical fire, prompting local emergency management agencies to begin testing the air where they are. But the EPA maintains the levels of chlorine were deemed safe for most people, despite the strong smell.
The primary chemicals that we are concerned about or monitoring for is chlorine and hydrochloric acid. We didn't see concentrations of those chemicals in the air that would exceed an action level for us.
Neighboring Newton County schools are closed today. They were also closed yesterday. And these agencies are recommending, if you are sheltering in place, to turn off your air conditioning and make sure your windows and doors are closed. In Rockdale County, Sarah Hammond for Atlanta News First.
So why would you turn off your AC and close your windows if everything is okay? Marie.
Unbelievable. You know, Pastor, when we showed the slide where it talked about the global shocks, right? One of the events was a biological event. You know, I'm wondering if this could be classified as a biological event. And Pastor, it's just insanity. I don't understand. And of course, you know, they want to quell fear, right? They don't want people to start panicking. And this is when you have to be able to think for yourself. You know, you mentioned, you know, Jared having his gas mask. I don't think that's a bad thing, you know, but it just goes to show where we are in Earth's history and the fact that we need to be prepared.
I want to share something here. This is actually, I'm gonna drive home this point. I want to bring the minds of the viewers and the listeners here to a particular scripture as we compare Isaiah 23. Very, very important based on what we're seeing here. And this goes along with what we covered today. In verse 1 of Isaiah 23, it speaks about the burden of Tyre. And it mentioned the ships of Tarshish and how the ships of Tarshish and the people will be howling. H-O-W-L, howl. In agony, they're crying out, lamentation. If you skip on down to verse 6, it mentions the howling again, the ships of Tarshish. And in verse number 8, it says that the ships of Tarshish is connected to the merchants. And it's also run and governed by a crowning city. Now, Marie, let's talk for a minute here. When we say a crowning city, what is in a city, in a country, that would imply the crown. Who wears a crown in a country?
A king or a queen.
King or queen. Wonderful. And based on prophecy, we know this applies to the queen.
Right.
And who is this queen city?
The Vatican, the papacy.
And Isaiah is telling us the ships of Tarshish is linked to the crowning city, and the people are going to howl. Don't forget those words. Take a look at this. In verse 14, it says, the ships are laid waste. That means there's going to, whatever the ships of Tarshish represent, they are going to be laid waste. What if I told you that based on the prophecies and scripture, when you compare scripture with scripture, the ships in the Bible points to the economy? Take a look at this quickly. Look at this quickly. These are several scriptures on the screen right now. From Psalm, Proverbs, and Psalm again. Ships represent merchants. Ships represent business. Ships represent the economy. Psalm 48, Ezekiel 27. Ships represent the economy. Ships represent merchandise. Now, in verse number 16 of Isaiah 23, it says now, the harp, that's a musical instrument, will no longer be heard in the crowning city, with the ships, with the people howling. Take those principles, compare them now to Revelation 18. Marie, lo and behold, you know where I'm going with this.
Of course.
In chapter 18 of Revelation now, verse number 2, it mentions Babylon. Marie, what is Babylon called in connection with the crown, the crowning city?
Well, she's the queen, right?
That's verse 7 of Revelation 8. So we have some connecting links so far. In verse number 3, Babylon controls the merchants in verse 3. Look at verse 13. The ships, merchandise. And verse number 17, they will howl, ships, shipmasters, the sailors. Look at verse 18, they will howl and weep. And verse 22, and the voice of harpers shall be heard no more at all in thee. Isaiah 23, the crowning city controlled the ships, the merchants. And where did the union leaders go and receive blessings to actually bring about their new contract for the workers in the union? They went to the Vatican, and they called the Vatican the eternal city, the crowning city, because the Pope is viewed as head of state, head of church. Vatican, the crowning city. The Pope sits as a queen. You see it now, friends? And in verse number 13, Babylon will enslave the world. You won't be able to buy or sell because she controls the merchandise. Marie, any closing words there?
You know, Pastor, the quote, escapes me right now, but, Sister White talks about how that laws will be so stringent, yes, right? And we won't be able to buy and sell. We're going to get to a place where things are so expensive. People, just are in need, where they're going to decimate so much so to the point where we're going to be begging for a savior, and this is why it's so important for us to make sure that we find our savior, not in the state, not in the papacy, not in anyone else. And we realize that everything comes from Christ. So I am just encouraging your audience to get grounded. Those 5 keys, those 5 principles, you're always nailing that, Pastor. You're always drilling that down. We have to. The first thing, conversion, make sure that you're converted. If you're converted, God will take care of everything else. He'll help you to move to the country. He'll help you with evangelism, resources, and all of these things. So it's time to get ready, Pastor.
That quote was Maranatha, page 162. 162 of Maranatha. Now, again, I want everybody to go back to the book Great Controversy, and please, I beseech you, read the chapter entitled The Bible and the French Revolution. The Bible and the French Revolution. If you have the 1911 version of the book The Great Controversy, go to page 276. What we're seeing now, the divide between rich and poor, the rich monopolizing everything, the centralizing of wealth and power to the enslaving of the few, of the many. And the many, the workers, will rise up with great demands against these tyrants. We're told it was the papacy that wrought out those crises in France that led to the French Revolution. It was the papacy that brought the social, the political, yes, and the financial woes in France, where the many rose up against the leaders. The leaders were tyrants and destroyed the economy. Flourishing manufacturing cities were laid to waste because of the policies and the goals of the papacy. That's history. That's based on chapter 11 of Revelation. Okay. Friends, in closing, I'm going to say this. Many people are going to scoff at this, Marie. And that's why I asked the question earlier. What would you say to many who say, well, we have seen these stalemates before, these strikes before, and we came out of it? My response is going to say, your rhetoric is a fulfillment of 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3 through verse 9, because many scoffers will be in the last days. And what will they say? Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning. That's a lie. Because all things don't continue as they were, because things are getting worse. And we're seeing polycrises, these events happening simultaneously as we have never seen before. How many could have said, when Cestius Marie came down and was about to surround Jerusalem, how many could have said, when Titus was coming thereafter, we have seen an army descend upon Jerusalem before, and that army retreated, which was Cestius. So now we hear of Titus. No need to worry. Just stay right here. No need to flee to the country. No need to implement the 5 keys of survival. Well, in AD 70, when Titus came after Cestius, there was no retreat. There was no surrendering. And all those who were scoffers and mockers, before they died and before they burnt down Jerusalem, they suffered. People began to eat their children for starving. Yes. So that day is going to be repeated. So friends, again, I say, throw away the spirit of scoffing and mocking. Let's implement those 5 keys of survival. You know what to do with what you have heard today. Again, I want to thank Marie for joining us for this midday power surge. And by God's grace, I will see you tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern for another presentation here, wherein the protest and the reformation continues. Get ready, remain ready, get others ready before it is too late.